What effective ways are there to measure and monitor well-being, and do you believe they should be mandatory? And off the back of what Strike said, if you can add what is um, optimal shape, and how do we look at it?
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Debbie. Appreciate it. Great discussion so far. I'm so honored to be part of this great panel, and a lot of insightful information today. And so I obviously there's all types of metrics that are out there. I think we're on the cutting edge of what that looks like when we're talking about biometric monitoring, whether that's a ring that monitors your biometrics, your sleep, your temperature, your physiological state, the effects of artificial intelligence, and where that may take us as an industry. But when I look at where we're at stateside, and it's likely the same internationally from talking to colleagues, probably the single most important item that we can do, I believe, as an industry, is to have comprehensive annual medical exams and physicals. I've seen that in my work with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, where I work with Dan Kerrigan closely on the Safety, Health, and Survival Section Board. Now I sit on the NFPA Technical Committee. In my role with LifeScan, we see close to 50,000 first responders, and one of the things we do is take a comprehensive approach. So an annual baseline assessment of physical readiness, human performance, and how that correlates to the ability to perform our 13 essential job functions. Our NFPA in the U.S., 1582 physical exam, which is our look at our occupational health of our first responders. And then I believe, and I think we have the data at LifeScan that we've been doing it for over 2 decades, is enhancing that with early imaging detection. So we know, whether we're talking about cardiac risk, 80% of firefighters' deaths have enlarged left ventricle, and cardiac myopathy with subclinical cardiac disease, or on the cancer front, oftentimes, tragically, we don't start testing and going down the road of testing until symptoms are present, and oftentimes it's much too late for a good outcome. Yet we know firefighters have in the States 9% higher prevalence of overall of cancer, and a 14% higher mortality than general public. So if I had to, in the 4 walls of the question, I think the single largest thing we can do is comprehensive annual physicals, including physical assessment. In the States, that's NFPA 1583. So we've got that baseline, and we can notice, we can give coaching, we can do early intervention, we can course correct over the course of the next year. And for those that are interested, the IFC's put out a great guide to firefighter physicals for healthcare providers. Walks through in a very short, condensed 2, 3, 4 page outline what are the elevated risks, what are the increased testing that should be considered. So, and unfortunately, the work of the IFC that we've done as recently as 2016, stateside shows still about, I think the number was 40% of our volunteer firefighters, about 20% of our career firefighters are receiving no type of annual medical exams or screening. And the ones that are receiving something, it's not necessarily occupationally specific, and only about 10% of any of the screenings that are being done include a behavioral health component. Yet We know in our industry that's a significant occupational risk. So, and I'll just close by the question you asked, or a component of it was, do I believe they should be mandatory? I do. And, I believe it's how it's implemented. And it can be implemented, I like to say, with a carrot instead of a stick. With the focus being on this is about early detection and helping you safely do your job, survive the service, enjoy a long and beautiful retirement with your kids and grandchildren and family. So I think a lot of when people hear the word mandatory, it conjures up a concern, but I think it's like anything in life, it's how it's implemented. So thank you for the opportunity to tackle that one, and I hope with all the metrics that are out there, looking at this as a starting point for a baseline probably can provide the largest return on investment.
All right, Todd, awesome, mate. I'm definitely with you in the medical, and the thing in Australia at the moment is we're somewhat luckier than you in that our healthcare system in Australia is top notch. We have access to that, and any medical screening that we have will be integrated with that. At the moment, we're currently moving into that space, particularly around medical screening. We have the presumptive legislation around cancers, which is driving a lot of our decision making there. We have a very contested industrial environment, however, which is making this very problematic in the medical screening area. I guess what I might do, rather than go back over what Todd's done, I just agree with you 100% on that, mate. I think, well, that's the way to go. I think more from a physical perspective, and I go back to my original conversation where I said that we need to delineate the difference between well-being and fitness. I think they're constantly added together as a piece, and what that does is it causes some level of uncertainty and friction within firefighters. And I go back to one of the statements that, you've probably heard this in a multiple ways of doing this, but I think it's less important for us to test than it is to test what's important. I think we collect a lot of data, we test a lot of stuff, and we don't actually know what we're testing for. What do we do with the data? We're in an age now where, as Todd said with the wearables, I've got a Whoop band on that I'm trialing at the moment. The data is just simply not good enough to rely on to make decisions that ultimately affect lifestyle and life trajectories of our individuals. I think we need to go back to the fundamentals, particularly in the physical space, to say, what exactly is the job? Why do you need to be fit? What does fitness look like? And I think too much, and Eric nailed it early on, in that too many decisions have been made based on the way I used to do it. So the fitness test that I did 16 years ago when I joined the fire service is still the current test. We have a beep test in that. So for the North Americans particularly, the beep test is the 20-meter multi-stage shuttle test. And what we're finding is that the combination of that with the other physical testing is actually creating a barrier for our diversity efforts. Particularly, and we're looking at, we want women in the fire service, but in our fire service, we require them to have a very high aerobic capacity, which many of them can have, but what that does is deliver smaller women. The problem then is they then can't get through the next level, which requires them to do huge upper body strengthening testing. Now, again, we need to go back to the conversation of what exactly is the job of a firefighter? Is it someone who can run a marathon, or is it somebody who is physically resilient enough to pick something up, move it across space, and do their job? And I don't think we're actually anywhere near that. And there's a lot of contextual around that. I think the question is, should it be mandatory? I oscillate between this almost daily. I think to some extent, potentially, you would like it to be mandatory, but again, what's the purpose of doing that? And there's a huge level of fear in firefighters. I can only speak from the Australian context, where many of them have nothing else to go to. What happens if they can't go back on a fire truck? And if they're being tested on something that's not an effective or reasonable test, I always cringe when the army still use BMI as a test of fitness. That's a wellness test, not a fitness test. And the more times you make those mistakes, with your firefighters when you're in your messaging, I think you go further and further down a path of resistance where they start to push back, they start to just disengage with that. So I think right up front, you've got to understand, what are we testing? Why are we testing? And then what are we going to do about it? It's great to say, oh, look, we've got all these cancers happening. Okay, so what? In my fire service that I've just come out of, we were issued 3 sets of PPE. A house fire now is treated like a hazmat incident, whereby it's full decontamination. Gear is washed on site. All this sort of stuff's happening, which is a great example of how we've transitioned from here to here. Yet, from what I see, particularly in the American, the volunteer services, they're issued with 1 set of PPE. Great, I tested you for cancer, but what am I going to do about that? I think that's where the issue is. It's not so much, again, what I said, go back to less important to actually test people, but it's more important to test what's important. And again, I don't think we even understand the subpopulations within our area. I did some work, I was lucky to do some work with Sarah and Eric as well, where we were looking at female firefighters specifically. The part of the driver was when I was in the UK, we know zero about females going through menopause in the fire service. How can we assist them if we don't understand the underlying issues that drive some of these challenges? So I think that's where we want to go. There's a question there as well on the side here. What else? I apologise. There are some questions here. In terms of screenings for our firefighters at this stage, to be honest, we don't screen our people at all. We do nothing. We do a barrier test to get them in, and then that's it. But again, I'd be very reluctant. We're actually in the process of building a system, but I'd be very reluctant to drop in a test if we don't actually know what that is and what it's for. And then, again, I've only seen the American system from here, but your healthcare system is such that, how does that work? Is that going to bankrupt somebody if they get something? How do we train people to come off the trucks if there's an issue? That's a big fear, and I think that's why you see a lot of these older, unfit firefighters who will duck and weave and try and move through the non-operational roles. They have nowhere else to go. So we need to start to think about, how do we prepare them for a career post firefighting and actually let them transition to that. I know Eric, he can probably talk about that when he comes back on. The Dutch fire service, you've got a 20-year lifespan and then you're out the door. But during that time, they're going to prepare you to get out there. So I think that's really important. There's another one here from Dan saying health and wellness shouldn't be punitive. Hell yeah. But until the first time you sack a firefighter who doesn't hit your metric, it's now punitive, no matter how good your intentions are when you're doing that. So I think Jerry said it. We all know that one firefighter that none of us ever want to go into a fire with because they're just so unfit and so dangerous. But the question is, as soon as you remove that person, it's now a punitive thing. So that's why I oscillate between the two. I probably ranted a little bit more than I should, Debbie, so feel free to knock me off. Thank you.
No, this is great. We're actually getting through the questions really quickly.